The Timepiece's secret distinguished listeners, today we present to you a captivating tale of fate, secrets, and the enduring power of love. The Timepiece's secret. When 6-year-old Lily tries to sell an old watch to save her ailing mother, a chance encounter with millionaire CEO Alexander Blackwood unravels a long-lost connection. The antique timepiece holds the key to a shared past, a hidden daughter, and a web of deceit that threatens to shatter their newfound hope. Prepare for a journey filled with unexpected twists, emotional depths, and the unraveling of a secret that will change their lives forever. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button to stay tuned for more compelling stories. Now, immerse yourselves in The Timepiece's secret. The late afternoon sun, a pale imitation of its summer glory, cast long skeletal shadows across the grimy pavement of Bleecker Street. Nestled like a forgotten sparrow against the cold brick of a now-shuttered vintage bookstore, sat Lily Miller. At 6 years old, her frame was slight, almost swallowed by the oversized, faded denim jacket that had once belonged to her mother. Her blonde hair, usually a cascade of sunshine, was dull and tangled, framing a face that held an unnerving stillness for a child. Her eyes, the color of a stormy Atlantic, were fixed on the worn leather strap of the antique wristwatch clutched in her small, mittened hands. This watch, more than just a timepiece, was a tangible link to a brighter past, a past where her mother, Sarah, would laugh with a sound like wind chimes and her smile could chase away the deepest shadows. Now the laughter was a distant echo, and the smile a fading photograph tucked away in a shoebox under their threadbare couch. Sarah lay in a sterile hospital room uptown, tethered to machines that beeped and whirred, a constant, unsettling symphony of hope and despair. The diagnosis had been swift and brutal, a rare autoimmune disorder that was devouring her strength with relentless efficiency. The cost of the experimental treatment that offered the slimmest chance of survival was astronomical, a chasm of numbers that Lily couldn't even begin to comprehend, yet felt the weight of with every fiber of her being. Lily wasn't begging. She wasn't crying. Not anymore. The wellspring of childish tears had run dry, replaced by a quiet, steely resolve that seemed far too mature for her tender years. Begging yielded pity, not dollars. Crying brought fleeting comfort, not cures. This watch, her mother's most cherished possession, the one she'd always worn, its gentle ticking a constant presence in their small, cluttered apartment, was her only leverage against the encroaching darkness. Sarah had often told her stories about it, about the kind man with the warm smile who had given it to her long ago, a man whose memory was now a hazy silhouette in Lily's young mind. It was a beautiful watch, even with the scratches on its crystal face and the worn edges of the leather. It held a certain elegance, a whisper of a life Lily had only glimpsed in her mother's wistful sighs. Across town, in the sleek obsidian tower that housed Blackwood Industries, Alexander Blackwood stood by the panoramic window, the glittering tapestry of Manhattan stretching out before him like a conquered kingdom. At 42, he possessed the sharp, honed features of a man accustomed to command. His tailored suit, the subtle sheen of his Italian leather shoes, the understated elegance of his own modern wristwatch. Everything about him spoke of success, of a life meticulously curated and controlled. Yet, behind the steely blue of his eyes, a persistent undercurrent of unease often simmered. Alexander was a man haunted by the ghosts of what might have been. 6 years ago, his life had fractured, a clean, sharp break that had left a void no amount of professional triumph could fill. The memory of Sarah Miller was a persistent ache, a phantom limb that throbbed with regret and unanswered questions. He remembered her laughter, the way her eyes would crinkle at the corners when she smiled, the fierce independence that had both captivated and, ultimately, confounded him. He had given her a watch, a vintage piece he'd found in a small antique shop in Greenwich Village, its timeless elegance mirroring the depth of his feelings at the time. He'd even had a small private inscription engraved on the back, a single intertwined A and S, a secret testament to their bond. He had searched for her after their abrupt separation, his resources vast, his determination unwavering. But Sarah had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a silence that had echoed in his meticulously ordered life ever since. He had buried the pain beneath layers of work, of acquisitions and expansions, building his empire ever higher as if to outrun the gnawing emptiness within. Yet sometimes a fleeting scent, a snatch of a familiar melody, or the sight of a woman with her fiery spirit would momentarily crack the facade, allowing the old wounds to bleed anew. Today, the city's relentless energy felt particularly oppressive. Alexander was restless, a knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. A crucial deal had just closed, a triumph that should have brought satisfaction, but instead left him feeling hollow. He needed air, a brief escape from the suffocating confines of his success. He signaled his driver, a silent, watchful man named Jenkins, and requested a detour. "Just drive, Jenkins. No destination in mind." The limousine glided through the city streets, a black shark navigating the urban currents. As they turned onto Bleecker, Alexander's gaze, usually focused on the strategic movements of the city, was inexplicably drawn to a small figure huddled against a storefront. It was the stark contrast that caught his eye, the child's vulnerability against the backdrop of the city's indifferent hustle. And then he saw it. Clutched in the child's hand, catching the faint sunlight, was a watch. Not just any watch. A jolt, visceral and immediate, shot through Alexander. His breath hitched. It couldn't be. It was the same style, the same worn leather strap, the same faint scratch across the crystal, a mark he remembered noticing the day he'd given it to Sarah. "Jenkins, stop the car," Alexander commanded, his voice tight with a sudden, inexplicable urgency. He watched, his heart hammering against his ribs, as the child looked up, her eyes wide and wary. There was something about her gaze, a depth of sadness that seemed incongruous with her age, that tugged at a long dormant chord within him. He opened the car door and stepped out onto the bustling sidewalk, the noise of the city fading into a dull hum as he focused entirely on the small figure before him. He approached slowly, his usual authoritative stride softened by a hesitant curiosity. He knelt down, bringing himself to the child's level. The air around her seemed to vibrate with a quiet desperation. "Hello?" he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "What do you have there?" The child's grip tightened on the watch. "It's mine," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Above the city's din, Alexander's gaze remained fixed on the timepiece. He could see the faint outline of the intertwined initials on the back, almost obscured by years of wear. A wave of dizziness washed over him. It was her watch. There was no doubt. But how did this child— "It looks familiar," he said, slowly, his eyes now searching the child's face. And then he saw it. A fleeting echo of Sarah in the shape of her eyes, the delicate curve of her chin, a certain resilience in her small posture that mirrored the woman he had loved. "Where did you get this watch?" he asked, his voice now laced with an emotion he couldn't quite name, a bewildering mix of hope and a dawning, unsettling realization. Lily hesitated, her stormy eyes flicking nervously towards the passing crowd. It belonged to my mother." The simple words struck Alexander with the force of a physical blow, his carefully constructed world tilted on its axis. "Your mother?" he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. "What is your mother's name?" The child looked at him, a flicker of something akin to trust, or perhaps just a desperate hope in her gaze. "Her name is Sarah," she said softly. "Sarah Miller." The name hung in the air between them, a fragile bridge across 6 years of silence. Alexander's breath caught in his throat. Sarah. After all this time. And this child. The resemblance was becoming undeniable. A terrifying, exhilarating thought began to form in his mind, a thought so profound it threatened to shatter the carefully constructed walls around his heart. He reached out a hand, his fingers trembling slightly, and gently touched the worn leather strap of the watch. "Sarah, is your mother sick?" he asked, the question a mere formality, a desperate attempt to grasp the enormity of the situation. Lily's lower lip trembled. "She's very sick," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I need to sell this to get money for the doctors." The weight of her words, The raw desperation in her young eyes pierced through Alexander's carefully guarded emotions. He looked from the watch in her hand to the child's face, and then back to the watch. The intertwined initials, the familiar scratch, the echo of Sarah and her daughter's features. It all coalesced into a single staggering possibility. "Lily," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "My name is Alexander, and I think I knew your mother a long time ago." He paused, his gaze intense. This watch was mine. I gave it to her." The child's eyes widened. In surprise, a flicker of hope replacing the earlier wariness. The setting sun painted the scene in hues of orange and purple, casting long shadows that danced around the unlikely pair. The powerful CEO and the small, desperate child, bound together by a ticking timepiece and a shared unspoken history. The weight of yesterday's ticking had just begun to reveal its profound and unexpected secrets. The carefully constructed walls around Alexander's heart began to crumble, revealing a vulnerability he had long suppressed, a vulnerability now inextricably linked to the small, fragile figure standing before him. The encounter, a chance collision on a busy city street, felt less like coincidence and more like the inexorable hand of fate reaching out across the years. The contrast between Alexander's polished world and Lily's stark reality was stark, a chasm bridged only by the worn leather of the antique watch. His tailored suit seemed out of place beside her faded jacket, his confident demeanor softened by a dawning tenderness. The bustling city, usually a source of energy for him, now faded into a muted backdrop for this intensely personal and unexpected encounter. The hope in Lily's eyes, fragile yet persistent, mirrored the flicker of hope rekindling within him, a hope intertwined with a profound sense of responsibility and a growing certainty about the connection he shared with this small, brave child. The ticking of the watch, once a reminder of a lost love, now seemed to pulse with the rhythm of a newly discovered truth, a truth that promised to unravel the carefully woven fabric of Alexander's life and bind him to a past he thought he had buried forever. The interior of the black limousine was a hushed sanctuary, a stark contrast to the cacophony of Bleecker Street moments before. Lily sat beside Alexander, her small hand still clutching the worn leather of the watch, her gaze darting between the imposing figure beside her and the blurred cityscape rushing past the tinted windows. A fragile tendril of hope, tentative as a newborn vine, had begun to unfurl within her chest, warmed by the unexpected kindness of this stranger who claimed a connection to her mother's past. Yet, a deeper, more primal wariness lingered, a shadow cast by years of quiet hardship and the unspoken anxieties that had clung to their small apartment like dust motes in the weak sunlight. Alexander, for his part, was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The sight of the watch, the undeniable resemblance in Lily's features to a younger Sarah, the child's desperate plea, it had all coalesced into a seismic shift in his carefully ordered world. The years he had spent compartmentalizing his grief and regret now felt like a dam about to burst. He glanced at Lily, her profile silhouetted against the city lights, and a wave of protectiveness, fierce and unfamiliar, washed over him. This child. His child. The realization was both staggering and profoundly moving. He directed Jenkins to the Upper East Side, to the imposing facade of New York Presbyterian. The sterile, brightly lit corridors of the hospital felt alien to Lily, a stark contrast to the comforting clutter of their home. The scent of antiseptic hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of the unseen enemy that held her mother captive. Alexander guided her with a gentle hand, his usual commanding presence softened by an almost paternal tenderness. Sarah lay still in the narrow hospital bed, her face pale against the crisp white sheets. The rhythmic beeping of the machines beside her was a stark counterpoint to the gentle ticking of the watch still in Lily's grasp. Tubes snaked from her arm, feeding her nourishment and medication, a visible manifestation of the invisible battle raging within her body. The sight of her mother, so frail and still, sent a fresh wave of fear crashing over Lily. The fragile hope that had flickered to life in the limousine threatened to be extinguished by the harsh reality of the hospital room. Alexander stood at the foot of the bed, his gaze fixed on Sarah's face. 6 years. 6 years since he had last seen her, vibrant and full of life, her eyes sparkling with that indomitable spirit he had so admired. Now, she was a shadow of her former self, and a pang of guilt, sharp and accusatory, pierced through him. Had he searched harder? Had he refused to accept her silence? The question swirled in his mind, a bitter counterpoint to the sterile hum of the medical equipment. He turned to Lily, who stood beside him, her small hand reaching out tentatively towards her mother's. "She's resting," he said, his voice low, trying to mask the tremor of his own emotions. "The doctors are doing everything they can." Lily's eyes, wide and filled with a wisdom beyond her years, met his. "Will she be okay?" The question hung in the air, heavy with the unspoken fear that Alexander himself was struggling to suppress. "We're going to do everything we can to make sure she is," he replied, his gaze unwavering. He felt a sudden, fierce resolve hardening within him. He wouldn't let this woman, his Sarah, the mother of his child, slip away. The initial conversations with the attending physician were a blur of medical jargon and grim statistics. The experimental treatment was costly, time-sensitive, and offered no guarantees. But Alexander, accustomed to overcoming obstacles and wielding his considerable resources, was undeterred. He authorized the immediate commencement of all necessary procedures, his signature on the consent forms a decisive act, a promise to fight for Sarah's life with every weapon at his disposal. Later, as Lily sat quietly by her mother's bedside, tracing the lines on Sarah's pale hand with a gentle finger, Alexander found himself drawn to a stack of papers on a nearby table, Sarah's admission forms and medical history. His eyes scanned the familiar bureaucratic language, the lists of symptoms and diagnoses, and then he saw it, the birth certificate of Lily Miller. His gaze snagged on the blank space beside father's name. A cold knot tightened in his stomach. A suspicion, unwelcome and unsettling, began to take root. He sought out the attending physician, Dr. Ramirez, a woman with kind eyes and a weary demeanor. He asked about Sarah's medical history, about any family information she might have provided. Dr. Ramirez spoke of Sarah's quiet strength, her unwavering focus on Lily, and the absence of any mention of a partner or father, driven by a need. For absolute certainty, Alexander discreetly requested a DNA test. He couldn't shake the undeniable resemblance, the inexplicable pull he felt towards Lily, and the gaping void in her birth certificate. The sterile efficiency of the hospital lab felt strangely symbolic of the clinical detachment with which he was seeking to uncover a deeply personal truth. While they waited for the results, Alexander spent hours by Sarah's bedside, watching her peaceful, albeit fragile, slumber. He spoke to her softly, recounting memories of their time together, the shared laughter, the dreams they had once held. He told her about Lily, about the brave little girl who held his watch, unknowingly, carrying a piece of their shared past. He felt a profound sense of loss for the years he had missed, the milestones he hadn't witnessed. Lily, though quiet, observed Alexander with an astute gaze. She sensed the shift in his demeanor, the underlying tension that emanated from him. He was kind, undeniably so, but there was a guardedness in his eyes, a preoccupation that she couldn't quite decipher. The easy camaraderie of their initial encounter in the limousine had been replaced by a more formal, almost strained politeness. The call from the lab came late the next afternoon. Alexander took it in a quiet corner of the waiting room, his heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Dr. Ramirez's voice, calm and professional, delivered the news that shattered the remnants of his carefully constructed past. The DNA analysis confirmed a 99.99% probability. Lily Miller was his daughter. The world seemed to tilt on its axis once more. The sterile white walls of the hospital waiting room blurred. His daughter, a child he hadn't known existed, a living testament to the love he had shared with Sarah. A wave of overwhelming emotion, shock, disbelief, a surge of fierce paternal love washed over him, leaving him momentarily breathless. He looked towards the doorway, where Lily sat drawing, quietly in a coloring book, her brow furrowed in concentration. His daughter. The realization resonated through him, a profound and life-altering truth. He had a child, a 6-year-old girl with his eyes and Sarah's spirit, who had been selling his watch to save her mother. The irony was both heartbreaking and strangely poetic. He walked towards her, his steps feeling heavy, each one a confirmation of this newfound reality. He knelt beside her, his gaze soft. Lily looked up, her stormy blue eyes questioning. "Lily," he began, his voice thick with emotion. I just found out something very important." He hesitated, searching for the right words to convey the enormity of the revelation. "Sarah, your mother, and we knew each other very well a long time ago." He took a deep breath. "And, Lily, you are my daughter." The coloring book slipped from Lily's grasp, her small hands flying to her mouth. Her eyes widened, reflecting a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and a dawning, hesitant understanding. The sterile light of the hospital seemed to intensify, illuminating the profound and unexpected connection that had just been revealed. A connection forged in the crucible of the past and brought to light by a ticking timepiece and a desperate act of love. The echoes of the past, once faint whispers, now resonated with the undeniable truth of their shared blood. The sterile environment of the hospital, a place of healing and sometimes loss, had become the unlikely stage for a revelation that would irrevocably alter all their lives. The weight of the ticking watch had just revealed the deepest secret of all. The revelation hung in the sterile air of the hospital room, a fragile, shimmering thing that threatened to dissolve with a misplaced breath. Lily stared at Alexander, her young mind grappling with the enormity of his words. "My daughter." The phrase echoed in the silent corners of her understanding, a foreign melody in the familiar rhythm of her life with Sarah. Her gaze flickered to her mother, still lost in the silent landscape of unconsciousness, and then back to the imposing yet strangely vulnerable man kneeling before her. A whirlwind of confusion, disbelief, and a nascent curiosity swirled within her. He looked like the fathers, in the picture books Sarah sometimes read to her, but his presence felt both grander and more unsettling. Alexander watched Lily's reaction, his own heart a tumultuous sea of emotions. The years of longing for a connection he hadn't known he was missing, the sudden overwhelming surge of paternal love, were now tempered by a profound uncertainty. He had declared himself her father, a truth confirmed by cold, clinical science. But the real work of building that bond, of earning that title in her young heart lay ahead. Sarah's eyelids fluttered, a collective breath hitched in the small circle around her bed. Her eyes, when they finally opened, were unfocused, drifting like lost ships on a hazy horizon. A soft groan escaped her lips, a sound that was both a relief and a fresh wave of anxiety. "Mommy?" Lily whispered, her voice small and hesitant. She took a tentative step closer to the bed, her hand still protectively clutching the antique watch. Sarah's gaze slowly drifted towards the sound, her eyes eventually settling on Lily. A flicker of recognition, faint as a distant star, touched her features. "Lily." Her voice was weak, a mere breath of sound. Relief washed over Lily, so potent it almost buckled her small knees. "Yes, Mommy. It's me." She reached out and gently took her mother's hand, her small fingers intertwining with Sarah's. Then, Sarah's gaze shifted, moving past Lily to the man kneeling beside her, her brow furrowed, a flicker of confusion clouding her still hazy eyes. She blinked slowly, as if trying to bring a blurry image into focus. Who are you?" Her voice was barely audible, laced with a disorientation that chilled Alexander to the bone. The question hung in the air, heavy with a meaning far beyond its simple words. Alexander's carefully constructed hope faltered. He had anticipated shock, perhaps even anger, but not this. This complete lack of recognition. "Sarah, it's me. Alexander," he said softly, his voice filled with a mixture of concern and a dawning apprehension. He moved closer to the bed, his gaze earnest. Sarah stared at him blankly, her eyes searching his face as if he were a complete stranger. There was no spark of recognition, no flicker of the fiery spirit he remembered so vividly. Her expression was vacant, lost in a fog of recent trauma and medication. Dr. Ramirez, who had been observing Sarah's awakening, stepped forward gently. "Sarah, you've been through a lot. It's normal to feel a little confused." She turned to Alexander. "The anesthesia and the trauma. It can sometimes cause temporary disorientation, even memory loss." Temporary. The word offered a sliver of hope, but the blankness in Sarah's eyes felt like a vast, unbridgeable chasm over. The next few days, Sarah's physical strength slowly began to return, a fragile bloom pushing through the parched earth. She recognized Lily, her love for her daughter an unshakable anchor in the shifting tides of her memory. But Alexander remained a stranger, a vaguely familiar face that elicited no emotional response. He visited her every day, spending hours by her bedside, talking softly about their past, recounting shared memories, showing her photographs from their time together. He spoke of the laughter, the dreams, the fierce connection they had once shared, but his words seemed to fall on deaf ears, lost in the labyrinth of her lost memories. The contrast between Lily's burgeoning hope and Alexander's growing frustration was palpable. Lily, buoyed by the knowledge of her father's presence and his unwavering support, began to ask questions about him, her curiosity a bright spark in the often somber atmosphere of the hospital room. Alexander answered patiently, carefully choosing his words, trying to paint a picture of the man he had been, the man he hoped to be for her. But for Sarah, he was an enigma, a well-meaning stranger who seemed inexplicably attached to her and her daughter. The antique watch, still a constant presence on Lily's wrist, held no significance for her, a forgotten trinket from a life she no longer remembered. This amnesia created a formidable barrier, not only to their rekindled relationship, but also to Alexander's attempts to understand why Sarah had disappeared 6 years ago without a word. The secrets of their past remained locked away behind a wall of lost memories. One afternoon, while Alexander was showing Sarah a photograph of them laughing on a beach in Montauk, a flicker of something, a shadow of recognition perhaps, crossed her face. She reached out a hesitant hand and touched the photograph, her brow furrowed in concentration. This feels familiar," she whispered, her voice strained. A surge of hope coursed through Alexander. "Do you remember anything else, Sarah?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, his heart pounding with anticipation. Sarah closed her eyes, her brow still furrowed. After a long moment of silence, she shook her head slowly. "No, it's just a feeling, like a dream I almost remember." The flicker of recognition vanished, leaving behind the same vacant stare. The setback was disheartening, a stark reminder of the fragile and unpredictable nature of Sarah's condition. Alexander felt a surge of helplessness, a feeling he rarely experienced in his professional life. He could command corporations, negotiate complex deals, but he couldn't unlock the memories trapped within the woman he loved. One evening, as Alexander was leaving the hospital, Dr. Ramirez approached him with a concerned expression. "Mr. Blackwood," she said quietly, "there's something I think you should know. Sarah has been experiencing occasional moments of heightened anxiety, almost panic attacks. She can't articulate what triggers them, but they seem to be linked to a deep-seated fear." This new development added another layer of complexity to the situation. Not only was Sarah's memory gone, but she was also grappling with an unknown terror lurking beneath the surface of her amnesia. The secrets of the past seemed to be manifesting not just as lost memories, but as tangible emotional distress. Alexander felt a growing unease. Could Sarah's sudden disappearance 6 years ago be linked to this fear? Was her amnesia a shield, a subconscious defense mechanism against a traumatic event? The questions multiplied, forming a dense fog of uncertainty. He decided to delve deeper into Sarah's past, to try and piece together the fragments of her life before they met. He hired a private investigator, a discreet and resourceful woman named Ms. Evelyn Reed, to look into Sarah's life before their relationship began. He provided Ms. Reed with the few details he knew: her previous address, her former workplace, any names of friends or family she might have mentioned. He knew it was a long shot, but he felt a desperate need to understand the woman he loved, the woman who held the key to his past, and the mother of his child. Meanwhile, Lily, sensing the unspoken tension between Alexander and her still distant mother, began to act as a silent bridge between them. She would draw pictures for Sarah, often including Alexander in her colorful depictions of their burgeoning, unconventional family. She would tell Sarah stories about Alexander's kindness, his gentle touch, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. Her innocent efforts, though sometimes met with Sarah's vacant gaze, held a quiet power, a persistent whisper of connection in the echoing silence of lost memories. The antique watch on her wrist, a tangible link to a past Sarah couldn't recall, continued its steady ticking, a silent promise of time, and perhaps eventual healing. The sterile light of the hospital, while offering the hope of physical recovery, now illuminated the complex and emotionally charged journey of reclaiming lost memories and forging new bonds in the shadow of the unknown. The labyrinth of Sarah's mind held the key to not only their shared past, but also to the unsettling fear that flickered beneath the surface of her amnesia. A fear that hinted at a darkness yet to be revealed. The sterile confines of Sarah's hospital room had become a familiar, almost suffocating landscape for Alexander. Days bled into nights, marked only by the rhythmic beeping of machines and the fluctuating hope clinging to the edges of his weary mind. Sarah's physical recovery continued its slow, steady ascent, but the labyrinth of her amnesia remained stubbornly locked, the fear that flickered in her eyes during her moments of anxiety, a constant, unsettling reminder of the unseen walls. Within her mind, Ms. Evelyn Reed, the private investigator Alexander had hired, was a woman who moved through the shadows with the quiet efficiency of a seasoned predator. Her office, a dimly lit space filled with stacks of files and the faint scent of old paper, felt like a repository of forgotten lives and buried secrets. She possessed a sharp intellect and an uncanny ability to unearth the truth hidden beneath layers of carefully constructed facades. Her initial findings regarding Sarah's life before Alexander were sparse. Sarah Miller had been a fiercely independent young woman, working as a freelance graphic designer, moving between temporary apartments in Brooklyn and Queens. There were few close friends, no immediate family in the city. Her past seemed deliberately uncluttered, almost as if she had been meticulously erasing her tracks. However, Ms. Reed had uncovered a few intriguing threads. A series of unusual cash deposits into Sarah's bank account in the months leading up to her disappearance 6 years ago, originating from an untraceable source. A brief, intense friendship with a woman named Clara, who had abruptly moved out of state around the same time Sarah vanished. And a single, cryptic entry in an old address book, the name Victor S., with a phone number that was now disconnected. Alexander felt a prickle of unease. These fragmented pieces of Sarah's past painted a picture far more complex than he had imagined. The unusual cash deposits hinted at a possible financial motive for her disappearance, or perhaps even coercion. The abrupt departure of her friend Clara suggested a shared secret or a sudden flight, and the mysterious Victor S. hung in the air like an unanswered question. He met with Ms. Reed again in her dimly lit office, the silence punctuated only by the rhythmic tapping of her fingers on a yellow legal pad. The air felt thick with unspoken possibilities, with the weight of secrets yet to be revealed. "The cash deposits are interesting," Ms. Reed said, her voice low and measured. "They started about 6 months before Sarah disappeared and stopped, abruptly when she did. The amounts were significant, but not enough to suggest a life-changing windfall. More like regular payments. Could it have been blackmail?" Alexander asked, the thought sending a cold shiver down his spine. Ms. Reed considered this, her gaze sharp. "It's a possibility, or it could have been some kind of illicit activity. The source is completely untraceable, routed through offshore accounts." The mention of offshore accounts sent a familiar unease twisting in Alexander's gut. His own business dealings, while legitimate, often involved complex financial structures. Could Sarah have somehow become entangled in something dangerous? What about this Victor S.? he pressed. Ms. Reed tapped the address book entry. The number is disconnected, as I said, but the area code traces back to a wealthy suburb of Westchester. I'm still digging into it. It could be a dead end, or it could be significant. As Ms. Reed continued her investigation into Sarah's past, Alexander found himself increasingly preoccupied with his own. The mention of untraceable funds and powerful individuals stirred a disquieting memory. A fleeting conversation from years ago. A hushed exchange between his father and his uncle Victor Sinclair. He couldn't quite grasp the specifics, but the tone, the secrecy, it had left a lingering sense of unease. Victor Sinclair, his father's younger brother, a man who had always exuded an air of affable charm and quiet influence within the Blackwood family. Victor had been a constant presence in Alexander's life, an avuncular figure offering advice and support, especially after Alexander's mother passed away. He had even expressed his condolences when Sarah disappeared, offering words of comfort and understanding. Now the cryptic initial in Sarah's address book cast a long, unsettling shadow over their relationship. Could Victor be connected to Sarah's past? The thought seemed both improbable and deeply disturbing. Driven by this gnawing suspicion, Alexander began his own discreet inquiries within his family's network. He made subtle inquiries about Victor's activities 6 years ago, his business, dealings, any unusual travel or associations. The responses he received were uniformly reassuring, painting a picture of Victor as a steady, reliable presence. But Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss, a dissonance between the public persona and the unease churning within him. Meanwhile, Sarah's moments of anxiety were becoming more frequent and more intense. She would wake, up in a cold sweat, her heart pounding, gripped by a nameless terror. She couldn't articulate the source of her fear, but it manifested as a visceral dread, a feeling of being hunted or threatened. These episodes left her shaken and emotionally drained, further hindering her already fragile progress in regaining her memory. One particularly distressing episode occurred while Alexander was visiting. Sarah had been lucid, engaging in a brief conversation about Lily's artwork, when a sudden wave of panic washed over her. Her eyes widened with terror, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She clutched Alexander's arm with surprising strength, her knuckles white. "They're coming," she gasped, her voice filled with a raw, primal fear. They're going to... The words trailed off, lost in a wave of incoherent terror. Alexander held her tightly, his own heart pounding with alarm. Sarah, who? Who is coming? But Sarah's eyes were unfocused, her gaze fixed on some unseen horror. She didn't respond, her body trembling uncontrollably. The episode subsided as quickly as it had begun, leaving Sarah weak and disoriented, with no memory of what had triggered her panic. This incident shook Alexander deeply. It was clear that Sarah's amnesia wasn't just a blank slate, it was a shield protecting her from something terrifying. The whispers of the past were manifesting as palpable fear in the present. He confided in Dr. Ramirez about Sarah's panic attacks and his growing suspicion that her amnesia was trauma-induced. Dr. Ramirez nodded thoughtfully. It's possible, Mr. Blackwood. Sometimes the mind protects itself by burying traumatic memories. The anxiety could be fragments of those memories surfacing. As the investigation into Sarah's past continued and her present anxieties intensified, Alexander felt himself caught in a tightening web of uncertainty and suspicion. The antique watch on Lily's wrist, a silent witness to a love story and a subsequent disappearance, seemed to tick with a growing sense of urgency. The sterile light of the hospital, while offering the promise of healing, also illuminated the dark shadows of a past that refused to remain buried. The whispers in the labyrinth of Sarah's mind hinted at a danger that might still be lurking, a threat that could shatter the fragile hope they were beginning to build. The contrast between Alexander's wealth and power and his inability to unlock Sarah's memories and quell her fear was a stark reminder of the limitations of his control, a vulnerability that left him feeling increasingly exposed. The cryptic clues unearthed by Ms. Reed, coupled with the unsettling memory of his Uncle Victor, painted a picture of a conspiracy far more intricate and potentially dangerous than he had ever imagined. The pieces of Sarah's fragmented past, painstakingly unearthed by Ms. Reed, began to coalesce into a disturbing picture. The untraceable cash deposits, it turned out, were not blackmail or illicit funds, but regular payments from a shell corporation, linked to the Blackwood family's extensive holdings. The cryptic Victor S. in Sarah's address book was indeed Victor Sinclair, Alexander's uncle. And Clara, Sarah's close friend, had not simply moved away. She had been subtly pressured, then financially compensated, to leave New York. Shortly after Sarah's sudden departure 6 years prior, Alexander felt a cold dread seep into his bones. The pieces clicked into place with a chilling logic, pointing towards a betrayal that struck at the very heart of his family. He couldn't fathom why Victor, his seemingly benevolent uncle, would be involved in Sarah's disappearance and the subsequent silencing of those who knew her. The affable charm he had always projected now seemed like a carefully constructed mask, hiding a darker, more manipulative nature. He arranged a meeting with Victor at his sprawling Westchester estate, a place Alexander had always associated with warmth and family gatherings. Now, the manicured lawns and the imposing stone mansion felt cold and menacing, the air thick with unspoken accusations. Victor greeted him with his usual hearty smile, his eyes crinkling at the corners. But Alexander saw a flicker of something else beneath the surface, a guardedness, a subtle tension in his posture. "Alexander, my boy, what a pleasant surprise," Victor boomed, his voice a familiar baritone that now grated on Alexander's nerves. Come in. Let's have a drink by the fire." Alexander followed him into a lavishly decorated study, the air filled with the scent of expensive leather and aged whiskey. The warmth of the crackling fire did little to thaw the icy knot of suspicion in his chest. He declined the drink, his gaze fixed on Victor. "Victor," Alexander began, his voice low and steady, "I've been looking into Sarah's past, into the time she left." Victor's smile faltered slightly, a shadow crossing his features. "Sarah? That's a long time ago, Alexander. Why dredge up old history?" "Because I deserve to know the truth," Alexander replied, his gaze unwavering. "And I think you know more than you're letting on." He laid out the findings of Ms. Reed's investigation, the untraceable payments, Clara's sudden departure, the entry in Sarah's address book. As he spoke, Victor's jovial demeanor slowly crumbled, replaced by a wary defensiveness. "These are just coincidences, Alexander," Victor insisted, his voice losing some of its booming resonance. "You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment." "Coincidences that all point to you, Victor?" Alexander countered, his voice hardening. "Why were you paying Sarah? Why was her friend pressured to leave town? Why was your name and number the only contact of significance in her old address book?" Victor's eyes narrowed, the affable mask finally slipping away to reveal a glint of something cold and calculating. "Sarah was a complication, a mistake your father made years ago that I had to rectify." The words hit Alexander like a physical blow. "A mistake my father made? What are you talking about?" Victor leaned back in his leather armchair, a sigh escaping his lips. "Your father and Sarah. They had a brief affair, years before you two met. Lily isn't your daughter, Alexander." The air in the study seemed to thicken, the crackling fire suddenly sounding like a roaring inferno in Alexander's ears. Disbelief warred with a sickening sense of understanding. Lily's resemblance to Sarah, the lack of a father's name on her birth certificate, it all clicked into place with a horrifying clarity. "That's not possible," Alexander choked out, his mind reeling. "The DNA test," Victor chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Oh, Alexander, you always were so trusting. Money can buy many things, even altered lab results, especially when the goal is family harmony." The revelation was a brutal twist, a cruel manipulation that struck at the very core of Alexander's newfound identity as a father. The protectiveness he felt for Lily, the burgeoning love he held for her, now felt like a lie built on a foundation of deceit. "Why?" Alexander whispered, the question laced with a profound sense of betrayal. "Why would you do this?" To protect the family, Alexander, Victor said, his voice regaining some of its former authority. Your father's indiscretion could have ruined everything. The scandal, the potential legal ramifications. It was a mess that needed to be cleaned up. Sarah was dealt with, and Lily, well, no one needed to know about her. Dealt with? Alexander repeated, his blood running cold. The casualness of Victor's words sent a wave of nausea washing over him. What did you do to her? Nothing permanent, Alexander, Victor said smoothly, though a flicker of something unreadable crossed his eyes. A gentle persuasion to leave, a financial incentive to start a new life elsewhere. Until you came along, stirring up the past. The panic attack Sarah had been experiencing, the deep-seated fear. It all pointed towards a trauma far greater than mere amnesia. Victor's gentle persuasion likely involved threats, coercion, and a deliberate attempt to erase her from their lives. Just then, Alexander's phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a text message from Ms. Reed. I found Clara. She's willing to talk. Says Sarah was terrified of someone named Victor. The confirmation hit Alexander like a punch to the gut. He stood up, his hands clenched into fists. The shock of Victor's confession was quickly giving way to a burning rage. You manipulated me, Alexander said, his voice low and dangerous. You lied to me. You tried to erase Sarah and Lily from my life. Victor stood up as well, his affable mask completely gone, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. I did what was necessary to protect this family, Alexander. You were blinded by sentimentality. Sentimentality, Alexander scoffed. You tried to destroy a family. My family. The confrontation escalated, the air in the opulent study crackling with animosity. Alexander, reeling from the betrayal and the devastating revelation about Lily's parentage, felt a fierce protectiveness surge within him, not just for the truth, but for Lily and for the woman he still loved, despite the tangled web of lies and deceit. I'm going to the police, Victor, Alexander stated, his voice twerdy. You won't get away with this. Victor's eyes narrowed. Think carefully, Alexander. This could ruin everything. The Blackwood name, your reputation. My reputation is meaningless compared to the truth, Alexander retorted. As Alexander turned to leave, Victor's voice, now laced with desperation, stopped him. There's more, Alexander. Something you need to know about why Sarah was really a threat. He hesitated, a conflict raging in his eyes. Your father, his business dealings, they weren't always clean. Sarah stumbled upon something that could have brought everything crashing down. I had to protect him, Alexander. Protect all of us. This new revelation, a dark secret surrounding his own father's past, added another layer of complexity to the already fractured situation. The betrayal ran deeper than Alexander had imagined, implicating not only Victor but potentially his deceased father as well. The truth, it seemed, was a mnogo-grande and dangerous thing, and the unmasking of Victor Sinclair had only revealed another, even more unsettling layer of deceit. The opulent study, once a symbol of family comfort, now felt like a gilded cage, holding within its walls a legacy of lies and a dangerous secret that threatened to shatter the Blackwood dynasty. The ticking of the antique watch, though Sarah couldn't remember its significance, now seemed to echo the relentless passage of time, bringing closer the moment when all the secrets would finally be laid bare. The sterile chill of the hospital room had finally receded, replaced by the warm, inviting glow of the early morning sun streaming through the windows of Alexander's penthouse overlooking Central Park. Sarah, though still navigating the fragmented landscape of her recovered memories, sat on the plush sofa, a steaming mug of tea warming her hands. The fear that had haunted her waking hours had begun to dissipate, replaced by a cautious sense of peace, a fragile trust blooming in the fertile ground of Alexander's unwavering support and Lily's innocent affection. Lily, perched on the rug at Sarah's feet, meticulously arranged a collection of colorful stones she had gathered during a recent outing to the park. The antique watch, a constant companion on her small wrist, ticked softly, its rhythmic pulse now a comforting reminder of the journey they had undertaken. The confrontation with Victor Sinclair had been a brutal, emotionally draining affair. Armed with Ms. Reed's meticulous evidence and Clara's tearful testimony, Alexander had presented the truth to the authorities. The revelation of Victor's manipulation, his attempts to silence Sarah and conceal Lily's true parentage, and the implication of Alexander's deceased father's potentially illicit dealings had sent shockwaves through the Blackwood family and the city's elite circles. The ensuing legal battle had been fierce and protracted, but ultimately, justice had prevailed. Victor, stripped of his influence and facing serious charges, was now a pariah, his carefully constructed facade shattered beyond repair. The revelation about Lily's true paternity had initially created a seismic tremor in Alexander's heart. The foundation of his newfound fatherhood had been built on a lie. Yet looking at Lily, her bright, inquisitive eyes mirroring Sarah's spirit, he knew that biology was only a small part of what made a family. The bond they had forged in the crucible of shared adversity, the unconditional love that had blossomed between them was far stronger than any genetic link. He was her father, not by chance, but by choice, by the unwavering commitment he felt in every fiber of his being. Sarah's memory recovery had been a slow, delicate process, like piecing together fragments of a shattered mosaic. Certain memories remained elusive, shrouded in a protective fog. But the core of her past with Alexander, the intense love they had shared, was gradually resurfacing, often triggered by a familiar scent, a shared song, or Lily's innocent questions. The fear that had gripped her during her amnesia had begun to recede as the truth emerged, the nameless terror replaced by a dawning understanding of the danger she had unknowingly faced. The contrast between the sterile, fear-filled days in the hospital and the warm intimacy of their new life was stark. The cold, impersonal environment had given way to a home filled with laughter, with Lily's bright chatter and the quiet murmur of Alexander and Sarah rediscovering each other. The tension that had once permeated their interactions had softened into a comfortable ease, a shared understanding forged in the fires of truth and forgiveness. One afternoon, Sarah picked up the antique watch from Lily's wrist, turning it over in her hands. A faint flicker of recognition crossed her face, a ghost of a memory stirring within her. "This watch," she murmured, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Alexander, you gave this to me, didn't you?" A wave of relief and profound emotion washed over Alexander. He knelt beside her, taking her hand in his. "Yes, Sarah, a long time ago." A soft smile touched her lips, a genuine, unburdened smile that Alexander hadn't seen in what felt like a lifetime. "It feels important." The dam of her lost memories began to crack, small fissures widening to reveal glimpses of the past. Over the following weeks, more memories surfaced. Their first meeting, their shared dreams, the depth of their love. The fear that had clung to her began to dissipate, replaced by a growing sense of clarity and the comforting weight of Alexander's unwavering presence. The final confrontation with the lingering shadows of the past came in the form of Alexander's father's hidden journals, unearthed by Ms. Reed during her continued investigation into Victor's network. The journals revealed the extent of his father's unethical business practices and the real reason Victor had felt compelled to silence Sarah, not out of familial loyalty, but to protect his own complicity in those dealings. The revelation cast a harsh light on the legacy Alexander had inherited, forcing him to confront the uncomfortable truth about the man he had once admired. In a symbolic act of closure, Alexander decided to establish a foundation in his father's name, dedicated to ethical business practices and supporting victims of corporate malfeasance. It was his way of acknowledging the past while forging a more honorable future, a way of atoning for the sins of the father. Months passed. Sarah's memory continued to return, the gaps slowly filling in. The fear that had haunted her dreams receded, replaced by a growing sense of security and the unwavering love of her family. Lily blossomed, her bright spirit no longer shadowed by worry, her laughter echoing through their home like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, Alexander, Sarah, and Lily stood together on their balcony, overlooking the twinkling lights of the city. Lily held the antique watch, its gentle ticking a comforting presence in the quiet evening air. "Papa," Lily said, her voice soft, "will the bad people come back?" Alexander knelt beside her, his arm around Sarah's shoulders. "No, sweetheart. The bad people won't hurt us anymore. We're safe now. We're together." Sarah leaned her head against his shoulder, her hand finding his. "We are," she murmured, her voice filled with a quiet strength and a profound sense of peace. The antique watch on Lily's wrist continued to tick, no longer a symbol of a lost past or a desperate plea, but a steady rhythm of shared time, a testament to the enduring power of love, forgiveness, and the unexpected bonds that can emerge from the most unlikely of circumstances. The dawn of their shared time had truly arrived, promising a future built on honesty, love, and the unbreakable connection they had forged in the crucible of adversity. The scars of the past remained, but they were no longer wounds. They were marks of resilience, reminders of the long and arduous journey that had ultimately led them to this moment of quiet, profound happiness. The city lights twinkled below, no longer a symbol of cold indifference, but a vibrant backdrop to their intertwined lives, a testament to the enduring human spirit that could find light even in the darkest corners. The end. Thank you for listening to The Timepiece's Secret. We hope this story resonated with you and offered some valuable insights. At its heart, this narrative explores the enduring power of love and connection in the face of adversity and the complexities of family, both by blood and by choice. It highlights the importance of truth and forgiveness in overcoming past traumas and building a meaningful future. Lily's unwavering hope and Alexander's journey of self-discovery underscore the resilience of the human spirit. The antique watch serves as a potent symbol of destiny, memory, and the unexpected ways in which our lives can intersect. We hope this story encourages you to cherish the bonds you share and to never underestimate the power of a single act of kindness or the enduring strength of the human heart. If you enjoyed The Timepiece's Secret, please leave a comment below, hit the like button, and subscribe to our channel for more compelling stories. Thank you for joining us on this journey.